Italy's Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni is facing a hard political balancing act on Ukraine. She stands firmly behind Kyiv in its conflict with Russia, but there are signs neither the voters nor her political allies share her convictions. Welcome to Roundtable. I'm Philip Hampsheir. Polls in Italy show public support for sending weapons to Ukraine has plummeted. Despite that, Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni says she'll continue to back Kyiv because, in her words, it's the right thing to do. However, it's not just the general public who isn't fully behind her position on Ukraine. Even her own party and coalition partners appear to be losing the will to continue to send support. Silvio Berlusconi even went as far as blaming Ukraine's President Zlensky for provoking the conflict. So, can Meloni stay the course? Let's discuss this with our guests. In Milan, we have Brunello Rosa, who's Chief Executive Officer of Rosa and Robini Associates. He's also a visiting professor at Bocconi University. And in Florence, we have Professor Valeria Fargion. She teaches the politics of European integration at the University of Florence. Thank you very much for both joining me. Brunello, I'm going to pass the first question across to you. 6 months ago, when Giorgia Meloni was elected to office, we had some almost hysterical commentary in some of the West European newspapers saying she was a fascist and this was a far-right government. We're 6 months in now. Is there any indication of that, in your opinion?
Yeah, I remember at that time when all commentators said, oh, my goodness, fascism is returning to Italy. I would say that were a bit exaggerated comments if you think in terms of the abolition of civil liberties, freedom of press, freedom of speech, freedom of thought, all those things, freedom of association, and all other things that happened during fascism. None of that, of course, is has happened in the last 6 months. If anything, Giorgia Meloni has been quite astute in portraying herself as a relatively moderate mainstream prime minister, working under, let's say, the limitations that have been put first by her predecessor, Mario Draghi, and of course, all the constraints that Italy faces when doing policy. So from both domestic institutions such as Banca d'Italia to international institutions such as the ECB or the European Commission, European Council. So I don't see any, for the time being, danger of Italy falling back into fascism.
Valeria, when she came to power, even the BBC described her as far-right. The Atlantic over in the United States more or less openly called her a fascist. Not quite, but it was right up there on the line. 6 months in, you've not been a fan of hers, but how do you feel she has done in terms of that? Has she been a populist leader, a far-right leader? Has she been a moderate, as Brunello said?
Okay, let me first say that something I usually say in my organizational theory courses is that you stand where you sit, which means that her positions changed from when she was a leader in the opposition and now she's prime minister. So I expected her to change her positions. Nevertheless, so on the one hand, she had to legitimize herself in the international arena. And obviously coming after Draghi, who's probably the most authoritative leader that we have ever had in Italy, it was a problem for her. And she had to be very careful with what she was going to do in the international arena. So in that sense, I see continuity with respect to what Draghi was doing. Nevertheless, 6 months on, there are some problems that are coming to the fore, and I'm thinking especially of the fact that some of her ministers are a thorn in her side. But I will leave it there. Maybe I can explain that better in a minute.
Is that to do with issues within a coalition and there being sort of issues of personalities, though? Or is that to do with core underlying issues and problems within her party?
Okay, it's both. Actually, She has problems with the partners in her coalition. And please consider that her electoral strength is like she had over 7 million people voting for her, but only 2.4 voting for the League and 2.2 voting for Forza Italia, which is Berlusconi's party. So there is an imbalance in the coalition. She's much stronger, but the two parties, minority parties, are trying, to show up, and they're giving some trouble. They're giving her some trouble. But not only does she have trouble inside her own majority, she's also got trouble from outside. And when it comes to international issues, I'm afraid I have to say that in Italy, there has always been a deeply entrenched anti-American feeling. Please remember that Italy had the largest communist party in Western Europe. So what I'm saying is that there are some problems and some, in a way, an apparently inconceivable convergence between parts of the right, and the League in particular, or even Forza Italia, and the pacifist movement on the left, which is kind of probably unexpected for an audience which is not Italian.
Well, we'll talk about that more in a second, and particularly how that references to Ukraine. But Brunello, I want to quickly ask you, do you agree with what Valeria has been saying?
Yeah, I think it's a fair representation of the things that have happened in the last few months in Italy. Clearly, the government has been busy with lots of domestic affairs. In particular, as soon as they were elected, they had to rush through for an approval of the budget that, as you know, was due by the 31st of December in order to avoid kind of entering what is called esercizio provvisorio, which means sort of emergency budget. And soon after that, and we are talking about these weeks, is about the implementation and final approval of the recovery plan for Europe. In the middle of this, we had lots of discussions regarding Italy's position vis-à-vis immigration, both domestic and in Europe. But I don't think this is going anywhere in particular. Much more interesting is, in fact, I think the discussion on the recovery plan that is, in fact, dividing the government at this stage, both within the coalition and to some extent also within Meloni's party.
Valeria, if we look at the politics in Italy at the moment, we'll get to the domestic stuff in a second, but I did say to you we'd talk about Ukraine. Meloni seems to have a problem within Italy with regards to the Ukraine issue. One of the Italian newspapers at the end of February conducted a poll of its readers and asked them, well, how do you feel about Italy sending arms across to Ukraine? 45% of Italians were against sending weapons to Ukraine. 34% were in favour. 21% of those polled didn't reply to the question. So even supporters of Meloni's Brothers of Italy party had misgivings, with 47% saying they were against arms sales. If we contrast this with Meloni's position, this is what she's had to say herself.
We are ready to provide any assistance when the conditions are right to start negotiation. But until then, we will offer Ukraine any kind of support. We have done so thus far, and we will continue to do so.
So there seems, Valeria, to be a very slight friction here between, if you like, international policy and what you have to do to be Italy on the international stage, which is stand with your West European partners, help out Ukraine, and the feeling on the ground within Italy. This is a tension that's going to be very hard to resolve, isn't it?
Yes, I fully agree. There is a tension there. And if you go back in time, you see that up until 2017, actually Meloni, for instance, was against the sanctions that were issued by the European Union against Russia. And she was very critical about those sanctions. And that's up until 2018. And she was also very close to Trump, and Trump himself was very close to Putin. So she had a different position. But once she became prime minister, I think that her position was crystal clear. And even while she was in opposition, when Draghi was prime minister, her position was crystal clear. We have to support Ukraine. And although I actually dislike a number of her choices, I fully support what she's doing in the international scene. But what I mean is that we need to support Ukraine because we are in danger, and we're in danger in terms of our democracies are being endangered by what Russia is doing, and Ukraine needs to be supported, not just with wishful thinking, but even by providing military equipment. And that's where the trouble comes, as far as Meloni is concerned, both inside her own coalition, but also with respect to, let's say, society, because there is a strong pacifist movement in Italy that says we need peace, but can you really be and behave as a lamb when you're dealing with a wolf? And let me say that I am taking this strong position in part because of my British and Jewish background. I do not think that we can be a lamb with a wolf, and Putin is a wolf. But unfortunately, this is not the general feeling in Italy. So what I'm saying is that Meloni is actually in an awkward position when it comes to taking decisions at the international level. And it is in contrast to what she did before.
Brunello, Valeria's described it as an awkward position. Do you agree it's an awkward position? I mean, even if it isn't an awkward position per se, it is a politically difficult one for her to pull off this inherent friction between international commitments and what voters on the ground want, doesn't it?
Yeah, there's always this kind of tension. And I would say, as Valeria correctly said, Meloni starts from very, very different positions. She was a close, let's say, admirer, perhaps, put it that way, of Trump. In a coalition, of course, there are both Salvini and Berlusconi, whose parties and them personally have been close to Putin. So clearly, she didn't start from an easy position vis-a-vis the war between Russia and Ukraine. And yet, when she became prime minister, she had no other option that agreeing to what the international coalition wanted, in particular the major ally, which is the US. So she has done what she had to do. I'm not even sure whether she agrees with that. Sometimes, clearly, people can tell her position is a bit tepid. The position of a coalition is not very convinced, and therefore this is when some of, so to speak, of Russians allies, let's call it that way, try to exploit these differences within the coalition and within the US allies' position, try to find some cracks to see whether they can exploit these divisions. But so far, I would say the front of the West has been relatively united, even from countries that clearly would come from a very different perspective. Also because, as Valeria said, there's a very strong pro-peace movement in Italy. There's always been from the war in Iraq onward, just to mention the recent conflicts. But again, how do you ensure peace when there's a war? Unfortunately, you have to fight first, and then perhaps you can reach a compromise with your enemy after it has been reduced in the conditions in which you can have a dialogue.
Brunello, so how is she carrying her voters with her? Is she carrying her voting base with her and she's leading from the front? Or is she, as you say, carrying out these sort of tepid positions that she herself isn't necessarily happy to be invested in, and then she's got to turn around and deal with her voters after that and say, look, I'm really sorry, I wasn't happy about making that choice myself either?
It might be more of the second position, I suspect, in the sense that there's nothing she can do actually at the moment, apart from following the international mainstream position of the West, of the Western countries, the Western coalition. It would be totally out of line if she didn't. But there are always ways of showing that somehow this wouldn't be your preferred option, or you would kind of choose a different attitude. Sometimes she doesn't speak by herself. She makes some of the closest ministers to her speak on her behalf. Sometimes you see declarations coming up critical of some positions of the US, sometimes on a different field of the ECB. It's never her putting her face to this declaration. It's always somebody from her coalition, sometimes from her own party, that comes out with something that is not totally in line with the, so to speak, official position. So people understand that there are cracks, there are differences, but she doesn't put her face to that. I don't think she can carry on with that for too long. At some point, she will have to put the face on some decisions, and this is when she will really test her popularity.
Valeria, you agree with that?
Yes. Can I step into this? I think that what is happening recently is that there are a number of very symbolic policies that are being pursued and trying to attract the attention of the electorate on issues which are not so crucial and which only refer to a small minority. What is it that I'm referring to? There's a big debate now on surrogate motherhood. Now, is this really a crucial issue when we have great problems with climate change, when we have a war at our doorstep? Now, a big debate about surrogate motherhood, or even a debate about not registering the children of same-sex couples, which is another very highly symbolic issue. So what I'm trying to say is that there is an issue about appeasing her own electorate. And inside her own electorate, there is even a part which is really fascist, unfortunately. And I'm now thinking about what the president of our Senate said a couple of days ago about one of the most terrible events in World War II, which was the attack in Via Rasella. Let me say this for the audience, non-Italian audience. It was the resistance movement killed 32 soldiers in Rome in March 1944, and as a retaliation, the Nazi killed 335 Italians, in particular partisans and Jewish people. Now, what is it that the president of the Senate came out with? He said that this was a shameful action by the resistance movement, because in fact what they did was they killed a musical band with people that were almost retired. This is obviously has nothing to do with the historical truth of what happened. And can you imagine in Britain messing up with what happened in Dunkirk? So what is it that I'm saying? He's joking. He's saying fake news about a crucial issue in the history of the Italian Republic. And now he says, oh, I'm sorry, was he drunk? No, there's an attempt at rewriting history. So what I'm saying is that there is a subtle attempt at even a revisionist interpretation of history, which didn't come out at the beginning, but it's slowly coming out. And I could say something about migration and migratory policies also, which has to do with trying to appease its own electorate.
Brunello, how is she doing in the opinion polls at the moment? Are people still happy that she's prime minister, or after 6 months is her honeymoon period over and everyone's looking at the Ukraine situation saying, well, this isn't really what I voted for? Or is everyone more closely focused on the economy and domestic politics in Italy?
So she's still doing pretty well, I would say, in opinion polls. Both her personally and her government. There have been recent round of elections, of local elections, regional, municipal, and so on, where her coalition still came out victorious. So the center-right is still strong in Italy. Her position is still strong with the electorate and within the coalition. Nonetheless, let's be clear. So far, she has navigated within the boundaries that were left by her predecessor. She hasn't invented anything new in particular. She knows she has massive constraints on what she can do economically and financially. And for the first time in recent history, but I would say in almost all Italian history, there's money to spend instead of money to save. This is quite an easy position to be in to begin with. However, this can, as I was saying, this cannot last forever. Reality moves, and with it, choices will need to be made. So far she's been moving in a very narrow band, but at some point this band will move, and so she will have to choose whether to kind of deal with the new reality that she will be faced, or effectively be out of sync. And this new reality could come from anything. It could be a new financial crisis, for example, deriving from a failing bank in Europe, or even in Italy. That seems a bit remote at the moment, but you can never exclude a priori. It could be a deepening economic slowdown, potentially going into a recession. It could be in the inability of spending all this money that is coming from Europe, which means effectively Italy losing the trust of the Europeans as a spender of money. And this would be a massive defeat for Italy, because let's not forget, the recovery plan is kind of esame di maturità, if you want to call the Italian way, a sort of maturity test, because Italians have complained so many times that Europe has been a kind of mean mother, okay? Always asking sacrifices, never giving anything. Now, European partners can say, look, we gave you, 8 years of quantitative easing, so ECB buying your bonds. We gave you 6 years of recovery plans to spend around 200 billion euros, okay? So we gave you a lot. We helped you with the migration crisis when you most needed.
While they were doing that, Brunello, while they were doing all of that, Italian youth unemployment is still sort of in the 20% area. So clearly something's gone wrong here, hasn't it, Brunello?
Would you allow me to provide a more political answer?
I'll give you just a second, Valeria. Brunello.
Yeah, this is to say that the big structural problems of Italy are still there. And among them, more than youth unemployment, which is one of the issues, there's youth migration. People from 20 to 35 to 40 years are still leaving the country by the thousands. Around 120,000 people every year leave Italy. And this has an impact of about 1% of GDP per year in terms of missed growth, which can have severe consequences on the sustainability of that. How can Italy address all this? It has the recovery plan. Will they be able to use these funds properly to tackle those issues? My answer is, I hope so. My fear is, I don't think so.
Valeria, let me quickly bring in here, because I want to bring in a clip of Silvio Berlusconi, because Meloni's not being only attacked from the left, she's also being attacked from the right and within her own coalition as well.
That's what I was saying.
Here is what Silvio Berlusconi had to say.
If the Ukrainian president had stopped attacking the two autonomous republics of the Donbass, then the war would not have happened. I judge this gentleman very, very negatively.
Valeria, Berlusconi has been making comments like that continuously. Also, he has enormous sway in the Italian economy and in the Italian media as well. Is he helpful or is he not helpful to Meloni at the moment?
Yeah, the quick answer is not helpful at the moment. As I said, a number of she has a lot of trouble inside her own coalition. But let me please tell you that what is really happening in Italy is a growing gulf between Italian society and the political system. Please, let's remember that the largest party in Italy is the party of abstention. 17 million people did not go out and vote last September. Please compare this to the 7 million that voted for Meloni, the 2 million for 2.4 for Salvini, and 2.2 for Berlusconi. Please also consider that there are 13.5 million Italians that voted against the center-right coalition, okay? 13.5. That did not translate into seats in parliament, in the House of Representatives or in the Senate, because our electoral law has a strong majoritarian component. But if you really consider the figures that I've given you, I'm telling you, 13.5 million people voted for different, either center-left or the Five-Star Movement, or the center parties of Renzi. Only 12 million voted for the center-right. So what I'm arguing is that there is a disconnect, a growing disconnect between society and the political system. And this is not only an Italian situation. All of our Western democracies are suffering. We had a regional election just 3 days ago in Friuli Venezia Giulia, and only 48% went out to vote. So it was center-right that won the elections, but it won the elections with less than half of the voters going out to vote. So it's a minority. What I'm saying is that Meloni is aware of the situation.
Professors, thank you very much, both of you, for joining me today. I'm afraid that that's all we have time for on our show, but remember, you can see more discussion and debate if you head on over to our YouTube channel. Just search for Roundtable TRT World. But for now, from me here and all of the team, thank you for watching and goodbye.